today's Old Testament reading, we heard the story of Joseph. And Joseph is one of my favorite stories in the Bible. And it's pretty beloved. There are many children's books about it. There's a terrific musical called Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. If you haven't seen it, I recommend you get your hands on a video copy of the one with Donny Osmond. I promise you will not be sorry. It's a great story. But the bit we heard at the end today doesn't make sense without the rest of the story, which we heard a little of from Patty, right? So Joseph is the youngest of the 12 sons of Jacob, also known as Israel. And he is Jacob's favorite son, which makes him slightly less favorite with his brothers. And so when they're out in the field with the flocks one day, the brothers plot to kill him. But one of the brothers thinks, well, maybe that's a little extreme. Why don't we just throw him in a ditch? So they begin their plan about how they're going to dig a ditch and throw him in it, when a group of Ishmaelites come by, Ishmaelite traders. And they think, oh, this is even better. We can sell him to the traders, which gets rid of him, and we make a little money. It's a win-win. So they sell Joseph to the Ishmaelite traders, and they take this coat that's so famous, and they tear it into pieces, and they pour blood all over it, and they take it home, and they tell Jacob that his favorite son has died. He's been killed by a wild animal. And in the meantime, Joseph is taken to Egypt, where he's sold into slavery. And for many years, he works for a wealthy family, and then he spends a little time in jail. And then he gets called into Pharaoh's court to interpret a dream for Pharaoh. And he tells Pharaoh that the dream means that they will have 7 years of plenty, followed by 7 years of famine. And so Pharaoh puts him in charge of their assets so that he can store the plenty so that there will be food during the famine. Now, meantime, back in Joseph's family in Canaan with Jacob and his brothers, the famine has hit their area too. And 2 years into the famine, the family has run out of food. But Jacob has heard that there is food in Egypt. And so he sends 10 of his sons to Egypt. He keeps his youngest son home because he's already lost a son and he doesn't want to lose all of them. So he wants to make sure he's got one in his back pocket in case something happens to the older brothers. And he sends the 10 of them to Egypt. And this is where the story gets really interesting. I mean, I love this story. There's suspense and intrigue and revenge and all kinds of things. But here's where it gets really good. Because these 10 brothers come in front of Joseph. And they don't recognize him. But he recognizes them. What's going to happen? Is Joseph going to throw them in jail? Is Joseph going to throw them in a ditch? Will he sell them to some Ishmaelites? Will he have them executed on the spot? Anything could happen here. This is Joseph. He's powerful. He is Pharaoh's right-hand man. And here are the brothers who sold him to slavery. But Joseph doesn't do any of those things. Joseph begins to ask them, how's your father? Do you have any other brothers? What's your family situation like? He begins to question them because he wants to know about his family. And eventually he puts them in prison for a while. And then he tells them that they can go home, but they have to bring their other brother back if they want any food. And he keeps one of them in prison while they do that. So the other brothers go home, they bring some food with them, and now they have to convince their father to let his other son go back to Egypt with them, which they do. So they come back, and they have this big feast with Joseph. But they still don't know who Joseph is. And so while he's feeding them, he's packing up bags for them to take food back to their family, and he secretly slips in a silver goblet into their bags. And he sends them on their way, and then he sends his servants after them to catch them in the act of thievery. And so they bring them back into his court as thieves. And again, you wonder, what will Joseph do? Will he throw them in jail? Is this the chance he has to take revenge on them? And that's where we get the reading from today, where Joseph reveals to them that he is their brother and that he loves them. And not only is he going to feed their family, but he is going to bring their whole family, their wives and their children and their children's children and their father and their flocks and their herd, their servants and their whole household, back to Egypt, where he can care for them and make sure that they are well. Joseph loves his brothers because Joseph understands how loved he is by God. Joseph understands the mercy and grace and love that God has shown him, and now gives him the opportunity to extend that love to the people who deserve it the very least. Joseph knows that love means everything. In our gospel reading today, from the book of Luke, the Gospel of Luke, Jesus says this: "Love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who abuse you. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Forgive. Do not condemn. Do not judge. But love." In October last year, on a Saturday morning, a man with a weapon entered a synagogue during Saturday morning Shabbat services. He killed 11 people while he yelled, "Death to all Jews." The rampage ended when SWAT teams were able to wound him severely enough that he stopped what he was doing. They transported him to a local trauma center at a hospital, where he was treated by a team of doctors and nurses who were able to save his life. One of those nurses is named Ari Mahler. He is a Jewish man and the son of a rabbi. When the press heard what he had done, he got a little bit of attention. And so he began to talk about his life as a Jewish man and child in America. He said that he was not surprised by the violence at the synagogue, for he knows the statistics. He knows that while only 2% of the American population is Jewish, 60% of the violence, religious violence, perpetrated in this country is perpetrated against Jews. He knew what that man had done when he came in to his emergency room. And he treated him just like he would any other patient. The gunman thanked him for treating him, for saving his life, and for caring for him like he would any other patient. And I'm going to read what Ari said about it, because I think it's important to get his words right. He says this: "I'm sure he had no idea that I was Jewish. Why thank a Jewish nurse when 15 minutes before you'd shoot me in the head with no remorse? I didn't say a word to him about my religion. Besides, if he finds out I'm Jewish, does it really matter? The better question is, what does it mean to you? If my actions mean anything, love means everything. If my actions mean anything, Love means everything. I read that story last fall. And I remember thinking at the time, if I would be able to do that, would I be able to care for someone in front of me if I knew that they had done serious harm to other people simply because they were like me? Or would I stand back and let them suffer because I think they deserve it? And then the lectionary gives me this text to preach. Love your enemies. Do good to those who harm you. Pray for those who abuse you. Do not condemn. Do not judge. Forgive. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Man, that's hard. The way of the gospel is never easy. I listen to the news and I read the newspaper and I learn of the terrible, horrible things that people are doing to other people on this planet. And I want to hate them. I'm so angry about it. And I want them to suffer consequences for what they're doing, for the things that they're doing to children and immigrants and refugees and the poor and the hungry and the sick. I want them to suffer because they are hurting the least of these, the ones who look the most like Jesus. And then Jesus reminds me that hate is not the way. In fact, when I was thinking about this week, I was reminded of the great words of Yoda. Fear is the path to the dark side. Fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, and hate leads to suffering. Hate is not the way of the kingdom of God. It's the easy way, but it is not the way that we fix a broken world. Love is the way. Love is the way of Jesus. It is the hard way, but it is the way. Hate is the poison pill we swallow hoping the other person will die. But love is the life-giving Spirit of God that brings us into the kingdom of God. Love is the way that we heal broken relationships and a broken world. I'm going to put a little footnote in here because I think this is important to say very explicitly. Loving people does not mean letting people abuse you. If someone is hurting you, get away from them. Get help. Loving someone does not mean that they get to hurt you. But love is the way. It is the way that we heal. It is the way we heal ourselves. It is the way we heal others. It is the way we heal the world. Joseph could have chosen the path of hate and revenge. And he knew about God's love for him. And he understood that God, loving him, called him to love others. How much has God loved us when we didn't deserve it? How much has God forgiven us when we didn't deserve it? How much grace and mercy has God poured into us? Always, 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 God is loving us. And when that love fills us, we can love the world. Because love means everything. Amen.